And we're late, but live on Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on now both Mastodon and X. Joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on, again, both those platforms. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. We're excited to be back as usual. Life gets in the way from time to time, but we are here and we will keep talking, right? That's always the discussion point. We've got a couple of announcements. First up, training. From a training perspective, DEF CON training, actually the first one, the next opportunity that's coming up is actually in Paris. And let me grab the link here really quick. But that will be April 22nd, I think, through the 25th. This will be a 4-day course for practical secure code review. And if you are interested, if you are in the European region, this is the first time that we've taught over there, I think since I did DeepSec a couple of years ago, and would love to get back to seeing people in the EU. There may be more opportunities this year, but this is at least the first one that's coming up, and it is an expanded format. With the 4 days, you're going to be getting a little bit more hands-on activity, especially with the AI portions that are going to be new to the course and how we're using AI to actually enhance our code review skills. So there's that opportunity. And actually that is not the next one. That's the one in EU. The next, the one that's a couple weeks before is KernelCon. Dang it. I was wrong. KernelCon.
Actually, I was just about to ask you if there were still seats for that one.
Yeah, I believe there are. We're going to have to reach out to those guys because it's been up for a little while. And actually that's a 2-day course. We will be introducing the new AI content there. That'll be the first time that we really dig into it. So would love to have you guys, take a peek at it, start to use it in your day-to-day secure code reviews. Outside of that, Ken and I in just a few weeks will be in Phoenix or in Mesa for CactusCon. We're going to be having a happy hour sponsored by an Absolute AppSec happy hour sponsored by Redpoint, Dry Run. Sounds like there might be a few other parties that are coming to the table there. We will be posting details shortly on all the social medias and in Slack. So if you're going to be at CactusCon, we would love to see you. We'd love to hang out, talk security, right? Like that's what we do. The one that we had at DEF CON was awesome, right? Just really good to see people. All right. From an announcement perspective, I think that's everything. Ken, anything else I'm forgetting?
No, that sounds right. Yeah, that sounds right.
You would think after we create this course around code reviews and checklists that I would make a checklist of stuff to get through every podcast. You would think that, right? But you would be wrong. Yeah, it's okay. It is what it is. Right?
You run a business. I run a business. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So it's fair.
But first thing today, right? Yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to mention there before I jump into FlowGate?
No, I was just gonna say no. I don't have any news. I wish I did. That'd be really cool.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, like at Redpoint, we were doing like year planning, right? Like 2024 planning, 2023 year in review type, businessy stuff. One of the things that we've been talking about is the use of AI, the use of tooling to help speed up our process. That's always a constant discussion in the consult or in any development space, right? Like you're performing work. How do you actually do that more effectively? And one of the things that we use constantly are burp extensions. I know, Ken, you're probably not in the burp world as much as you used to be.
I use it every day, but only for the repeater. Only for the repeater aspect.
Only for development,
and I already paid for it. Yeah, exactly.
And you're already you know how to use it. Yes,
exactly.
Yeah, but from a like consulting perspective, right? Like we're trying to identify things like susparams, right? Like from Haddix when we talked to him, right? Like the ability to identify vulnerabilities quicker. And one of the things that has popped up recently is like this idea, the use of susparams, the use of gap. FlowMate is a new one that actually came through. I think it was TLDRSec is the first place that I saw it, because it's actually not in the Burp App Store yet, or the Burp Extension Store, whatever it is, right? Like, I'm posting the links here, but it's an interesting take on identifying vulnerabilities and actually seeing the behavior of your application. So giving yourself some context of what is going on with an application, what the parameters are, what the values are that are being sent across, as you browse an application. And so like we were talking during actually the planning session on how do we identify these things quicker, right? Like we've got a junior on the team. He's trying to figure out, how do we shove like our knowledge, like my knowledge of year over year, like seeing like vulnerabilities or seeing parameters and knowing what they are and what's actually doing with that, what's going on with them. And susparams is great. It's at least distilling down to, we've seen vulnerabilities in these parameters, right? So they're going to be suspect. You should probably take a look at them. But if you want an overall view of the flow and the data that's being sent back and forth to an application, we were talking about, dumping a burp state file, starting to parse that out to identify what the flow looks like. And then, of course, inevitably I stumble across FlowMate, right? So I was going to show what it does just based on VTM, the app that Ken and I use when we're doing the secure code reviews. So we can actually see the advantages to it as far as identifying those vulnerabilities and start to pick out the patterns that are being used. Again, this is all about giving yourself context of what's going on within an application, right? Whether it's code, whether it's dynamic, having context pushes you at vulnerabilities so much quicker. And Ken, I'm just kind of going off here. I hope you're, hope we're okay.
Oh yeah, I'm reading FlowMate. Actually, it looks really interesting. I thought some of the features that are like being able to define sessions, which are like cross session parameters. So neat, obviously, from a like what can one account do that another can't kind of thing, or what's common between the two or not common. I mean, that's kind of neat from a graphing out perspective. That's, I don't know, the first thing that kind of caught my eye. But yeah, there's some decent features here. So
yeah,
very cool.
Okay. It is. I mean, and it's just it's useful. Like anything that speeds up this process. I know it's what Ken and I, or like what my team does when we're analyzing an application. We're trying to identify what those patterns are. But a lot of this it used to be that we'd flip through different targets. We flip through, different sessions to actually see what's available. How to use after you load FlowMate up, and that's what I'm showing right here. You have to go to extensions and load it as the jar file, right? Pull that in, load it up. It adds a new tab. You come over to it. You have to actually add the target. So you browse to the site itself. You add, in this case, the VTM site, or, add that to the scope. I could remove it now, but I don't want to. And then what we'll do is we'll actually flip around a little bit, and we'll I'm going to flip over to my other screen right here, right? Okay. So this is Task Manager. I already logged in as, Chris, which is the default account there that has like lower level access. But if we log in with, there's a Seth account that's over there. I think there's a Ken account with like the password of password 1. I'm pretty sure, because Ken's just insecure. But if you saw on the, the screen from FlowMate itself, it tells you to browse the application, but as a part of browsing the application, it wants you to add like long strings, so it can start to identify what's available to it. And like make them randomize info, right? Whatever it is, right? Like,
can you just in I hate to interrupt your your
No.
flow here, but is there? I feel like there's well, I don't know. Like it's been honestly, I've been so focused on source code. Does Burp? I know it has. I mean, obviously, it's got the spidering function, but can you have randomized inputs? Like have randomized values that it auto generates and tracks, like or yeah, if that's what I'm trying to say. Like when it spiders and submits things, like submits
It
forms.
does.
Can
Yeah.
you? Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah. It will do that in an attempt to actually identify, especially with things like payloads, right? Like so cross-site scripting payloads or whatever else. You'll see it, with like a hash, so that it knows where it actually inserted it when it shows back up on the page itself. I mean, that was
Okay,
one of the
that's
features that
helpful.
that's one of the features that I actually stole or re-implemented with Sputter as well, because
Hmm.
it was useful. But let's
Sweet.
see.
Yeah, I could see how the two together would make everything a lot easier. That's all.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Let me see. So I stopped sharing that. So that was just me browsing the site. And then if I flip back over, I hope I re-enabled things, right? The Burp Suite, I did detection active. So you see like the match values, the parameter matches, and this is where it starts to get interesting. Input parameters and input values. It actually builds a Neo4j database, like a graph database behind the scenes that you can connect to directly and start asking questions about the session and what it was actually seen. We'll turn off detection right now because I don't want to pull any more data. I don't necessarily have any audit findings in here. And again, I'm very new to this. So, all right, like I'd have to jump into the guides themselves. Yeah. So there's the Neo4j database. Oh, look. So here's a graph of all of the inputs, the input parameters, the values, the match values, between them. So what it was seeing across the different, sessions. Um, yeah, so you'd have to look in and dig into it there, but this is where it started to get interesting for me to actually see what the matches were, where these parameters, like, okay, here's a first name parameter, right? It looks like, okay, that was Chris. It was on these different places. It was all the same. That looks like it was the same session. All right, so maybe that's not as interesting, but what about a post parameter, password? Oh, look, there you go. There's a password for me. Logging in, soccer lover there. Picture parameter, session IDs, though. There's all of these. Now, one of the things that I notice here right off the bat is the session ID is a cookie. There's 71 occurrences, but that session ID actually doesn't change. I logged in with two different users. And so the session ID did not get rotated, even though I logged in and logged out, right? Like we've got a session ID that's stuck, and that's going to be an issue because, you'll see search, view all users. So admin functionality down here at the bottom, but up at the top, profile pics, Ken, Seth, I think these were like task manager stuff. This is stuff from Chris, the lower level account, as opposed to the higher level account when I get further on down that list. So I've got a vulnerability that's right there in and of it in itself. Now, I'm not sure what the session definition stuff is here. I probably need to read up a little bit, but I think this is where it'll start to track, right? Oh yeah. So it'll track this one session, list the matches between those, and then be able to contrast and compare. So give yourself even more context. I was just excited initially to see like this sort of information, right? Like the ability to see all of the different, okay, here's some user IDs. There's some posts that are going on there. Interesting. Parameter, manage projects, usernames. Yeah. Anyway, so it's kind of this, the ability to give quick context and to do searches on it. You've got the queries to actually view what's going on in, coming out of Neo4j, but it's all automated, right? And that's where, like, that's something that makes me excited. So if you're playing with, if you're looking for something that's going to give you more context, I mean, Ken, do you understand why, like, from my perspective, I start to get, or like we're talking about that?
Yeah, it's pretty right because yeah, you need to map out sort of what these parameters are taking, like where are they operating. Gives you kind of a graph of commonality between and lack of
Yeah.
between accounts. I think one question I had was clarification around. So, like for instance, there's that CSurf middleware token parameter.
Mhm.
Let's see here. Query to view in blah blah blah. I'm thinking. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if like from here you could deduce where it's not sent to endpoint wise with post requests. I'm sure there's more optimal ways. I don't know. Maybe there's more optimal
Yeah.
ways already of doing
I
that. But
imagine there would be a more optimal, or what we could do, if we've got this art all in the Neo4j browser as it is we could look for post parameters where it's missing, right? Like, so I could take this query and actually query Neo4j and say, hey, where's there a type post? Show me the matches where CSurf middleware token does not exist as opposed to where it does. There's probably some
yeah, because the
easier ways to
only
do that. Yeah.
well, in the sense of if you were doing this in an automated fashion, I don't know. I don't know if there's an easier way. If you're doing it in a purely manual fashion and you're using like the proxy history, you could probably do a negative search,
Mhm.
and then just look for post requests specifically. But in a fashion where you're trying to like quickly run this just to get like a view of how it's behaving and get that like context gathering mode uh, finished, then yeah, it would be really nice to have that baked in
Yeah.
easily. And again,
Yep.
yeah, I don't know. You know, Burp's got this app store now where everybody can submit things, and so I'm sure so there's always like a plugin for I feel like for anything you can dream up and think of.
Well, yep, there's that. Then there's the new Bombas stuff that allows you like more search filters and the ability to do things, very, quickly without actually using some of the, the UI portions as well. I mean, CSurf Analyzer is probably like their scanners and stuff that probably would do a little bit better than this. But if you're already tracking in FlowMate and you see something just like you did, there should be a way to tweak that back out, or at the very least, the fact that we only see like 3 or 4 things in here and we did a whole bunch of other stuff, like I updated a user profile, that's a concern, right? Like, okay, I'm, it's giving me indicators again. Again, it's giving me context of what's going on with the CSurf middleware token, and it quickly did that without me having to dig through all of these posts, and identify, okay, what are the, okay, I see the token here, but that's managed projects, right? There's like other places where it actually exists. There's CSurf middleware token. If we don't have access to the code, I would have to go through each of these. You're absolutely right. But on the flip side, I could probably just compare the target here, like under task manager, and we could filter down to the specific post requests, because those shows up pretty easily, right? Like, oh, here, log out is a post request, but what else is profile? Okay, profile 3, there's a post request. But I think you're right. I don't think there's no CSurf token on that post request, right? So that is a vulnerability. And it hasn't popped up because we didn't have any of the CSurf stuff turned on, but we do know that it's there. Cool. Anyway, right? Like, just a useful tool, something to add to your arsenal to play with. I mean, we're just starting with it. I'm interested to see how the session stuff goes. If anybody has played with it, let us know. Cool. So that is FlowMate. I'm going to stop there. Any other comments, questions on that one, Ken?
No, but I guess I would bring up also, since we're talking about Burp, because I like the spicy stuff sometimes. I had this thought. I was like, since we're talking about Burp, it is funny to me because I do hear, and I know you do too. And even in Slack, we've seen people in our Slack talk about, as well as other Slack places, where they're like, Burp has XYZ problems. How has it not done this? I mean, you hear like, I guess what I'm trying to say is over the years, I've heard all means of bashing of Burp. And at the same time, we all use it. And somehow I feel still there's an emotional attachment and love of the tool. But to my real point, it's funny to me that nobody's created something better, Really, there's
Mhm.
nothing better. But yeah, we like, people bag on it all the time. I'm like, or I shouldn't say people bag on it all the time. That's very disrespectful to Burp. And I'm sorry. I do love Burp and I do love those folks. And I'm not going to, I don't mean that in any kind of negative way. I'm being honest though about the feedback that we hear, which is oftentimes not super positive. One of the biggest ones I think is, and I actually experience this periodically myself too, is it just eats up all of a sudden, like there's like a memory leak, and all of a sudden you're like, what is going on with my system? That today is still a problem. And while I understand it and I get it, because I build software too, I get it. I don't know. I'm just like, hey, if someone wants to build something better, they should do that. But in the
Well,
meantime,
yeah.
if not,
Yeah, I mean, this is it, right? Like
we're
I know
like,
we
why have we not?
promoted it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we promoted it a while ago. If you go to Kaido, I think that's how you say it, Kaido.io. Um, right. I think that's it. That's a new proxy, right? It's in beta still. Yeah. But here, let me drop it in there. And I wonder if if anyone in our chat or in YouTube chat here actually has played with Kaido and used it yet, right? I have like enabled it. One of the problems that it like my initial thought with it as I started to use it was I've become too dependent on extensions, right?
Mm.
um, from a testing perspective. So while you can port, you can build extensions into Kaido, and Kaido has like it looks better because it's not necessarily Java, the whole Java UI under the hood. It's looks a little bit more modern, but it's going to take a while to catch up, and it really will take people like switching over. And I have the same problems with Zap as well, right? From a UI perspective, it just is not. They're very much kind of professional tools, right? Like they're not very approachable from a UI. Um, like the UI design is just not great, right? Like I don't know. I don't know how else to to say that.
Right.
Um, yeah,
I
they
mean,
don't
I
look
think
like
it's
mod
fair.
packs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's things that you can do. You can change the defaults and you can make it look better. But it's usually how much time do I actually want to spend doing that when I've got work to do. And once you understand how to use it, it's not necessarily that it's not an impediment to using the tool. But for new people coming into the space, right? Like it's pretty jarring to go from like the Mac UI or Windows UI to Burp, right? You're like, whoa, what is this? And where do I actually go for this? And do we not follow any user interface standards? No, they don't. And then you add extensions on top of that. Every extension is different, right? Like how they implement things. Oh, is it a new tab? Oh, is it a right click over here? I have to go into the documentation to learn how that extension has implemented things, which is not a knock on the extensions. That's just, you have to learn the tool before you can actually use it. But not having that standard interface or that standard flow makes it very difficult for newcomers when they are trying to use those tools. So I guess what I'm saying, Ken, is I'm with you on that. As much as I love Burp, and we've paid for Burp for years, and we'll continue to do so. Kaido is an alternative, and I would really like to talk to someone that has used it in a professional setting. And used it for an assessment as opposed to Burp. Like I always run into the issue personally that we're under time constraints, right? Um, so I can't use both Burp and Kaido in an assessment and double the time or even like 1.5x the time that it's going to take for me to do that assessment. Um, just given the constraints that I have as a consultant. So it would be interesting to talk to people that are implementing or that have more leeway as far as the time they have to evaluate things to see if there is something there that would be useful and what their fill is for Kaido.
I actually might give it a shot because they have a monthly $10. I mean, they have the free version, but this is interesting because their yearly one seems to have priority support over Discord. I love that because like you give some decent feedback right away. And usually, I mean, I'm in the startup world. I know what that's like. The second someone tells you anything, you're like, yeah, you're now my most important. I mean, within reason, obviously you got to prioritize things, but like, yeah, like there's, obviously when you're newer, especially, it's like that's awesome. You're going to get good support is what I'm trying to say, because they're going to
Ooh,
immediately
yeah.
like jump on what you're saying. So that's one thing that's cool. The other thing that's very interesting is they have AI integration, and I'm curious what that means.
I just saw
Yeah,
that, right? Like now I'm
with the
like going
paid
down this
version.
rabbit hole. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, what does that mean? Not that
Yeah.
like, I mean,
And
it's interesting.
there's nothing on the blog. Dang it. Where? Come
I
on.
know.
Docs.
So And
Come on.
and by the way, because we have people who listen to this who maybe like don't know us super well. We don't get paid by any of these companies we talk about. We just look them up and get interested into something, or not interested in something. So we're not. This is. Anyways, I might give it a shot just to see what's different, because out of pure curiosity kind of thing. I use a proxy every day, right?
Mhm.
I use Burp every day, so it wouldn't be tough to just start using this instead and
And see
see
what
where
it
it
is.
goes.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
But
especially where
I
you're
just don't
getting
use
more
it in
replay.
your
Yeah.
capacity. That's sorry. Yeah. I just don't use it in like the consultant way. Sorry.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and that's what I'm saying is that's where it's going to get interesting is, hey, hey, that's how Burp, that's how Zap started is, they were developer tools for intercepting, like seeing HTTP requests and responses and manipulating those, like replaying them over and over. I mean, you go back in the day and there was Fiddler and Web Scarab and, um, whatever other, there was a bunch of other proxies that were very similar. Um, but they were just proxies, right? It wasn't necessarily targeted at the security space. That's where Burp kind of took over, and then Zap, from an OWASP perspective, or I guess Software Security Foundation now, right?
Yeah.
Perspective.
Yeah.
That's where they came about, right? But Kaido is interesting. I like, when I see the interface there, I'm always like, ooh, right, like this is awesome. But then again, like I start digging into, oh crap, like I want to do some of this other stuff. And I know there's going to be ways to do it, but it's the workflow perspective for me that becomes more difficult, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just find it funny that like it's cool though that there is this now, because it's just been the weirdest thing forever where I'm like, well, if everybody collectively has all these gripes, like why don't we do something about it? Or somebody, you'd think somebody by now, but yeah, somebody did. So that's cool. Thanks for pointing that out. I totally forgot about Kaido altogether. So
Yeah.
cool. Neato. Neato Bandito.
Backend
Um,
issues. And I mean, yeah, they're on GitHub too. Like it looks like the main project there. Yeah, there's a bunch of
yeah.
stuff. And either way, anyway. Um, yeah, cool. So next up on our list for today is actually, and this probably will take us for a while, right? Is reversing labs. Or do you want to talk CVEs or do you want to talk
Oh,
software
I have
supply chain?
actually have the software supply chain up in front of me
Okay.
right now if you want to chat about it.
Okay. Reversing Labs has released their software, um, security software supply chain, whatever you want to call it. Um, yeah. The State of Software Supply Chain Security 2024, a report. And this thing is long, right? Just be aware that there's quite a bit that is in there. They're going over all of these different issues that they've seen. I mean, just looking at maybe let me just share the tab, right? If we're going to talk about
Mhm.
it here. Yeah. Software supply chain security. If you just look at the table of contents, right? They're going into all the different issues that they're seeing with software supply chain. And to be completely frank, they're only looking at PyPy and NPM here, right? But they're talking about what's happened in the last year and where they're seeing it going in 2024. But before we get into the report, like too detailed into the report, Ken, what is your feeling? I mean, I know you're developing software, you're dependent on, software supply chain, you've been involved with, um, with some of the package managers in the past. But what is your feel, number one, on what happened in 2023 and moving forward, what's going to happen in the software supply chain space? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, so.
Well, so no, I mean they're so like they do talk about different package managers like NuGet and whatnot. They do seem to find most of the issues are in NPM and Python. I think that's interesting. Something that's a topic point I'd like to delve into on the why potentials whys of that. I think also they mentioned 28% an increase from 2022 into 2023 for supply chain attacks. Part of me questioned if that's not better detection or more eyes on the problem surfacing more uh, malicious packages, or if there truly is an uptake in malicious packages. I think there's a number of reasons why that could be. Yeah, sure, it's always going to be lucrative, but perhaps part of that's you know geopolitical. Perhaps it's the rise of ML technologies, AI technologies, making automating these things more easier rather. I don't know. So that was my from this whole thing. Those were some of the things that I think really stood out in terms of their analysis going forward. I can't speak to. Well, I can't. The one thing I will say is like everything you're seeing here, and they actually touch on it really briefly. That OpenAI is now becoming one of those places they're seeing massive key leakage. And we talked about it before with Hugging Face, which is the if I had to put it in words, it'd be like for everybody listening, it'd be like the GitHub or the Docker hub of LLMs, open source LLMs, right? So it's a registry of open source LLMs. They leaked 1,500, or various developers leaked keys. Some researchers found about 1,500 of them. They were all valid, or most of them were valid. Which would allow you to replace those LLMs. So I think you will see the same things that we're seeing in existing package managers occurring in dependency issues, just in the AI space. I've said that before. I still maintain it. I think it's going to get worse in that space until it gets better. Because it's interesting. But I wanted to say this from a practical standpoint, as somebody who has developed both building a product that secures other people's software, but then also, and my own, but also having to deal with the actual security of like dependency management stuff. I got to tell you, I know there are companies out there because I saw them at RSA. I've seen them at various conferences in the vendor booth area. I know that there's companies coming out that are tackling this problem, but like frankly, the depend upon kind of stuff. It's. I was just on a call about this because it's one of the questions is like, oh, your product like find all the CVs and all the things. I'm like, okay, but like, what do you do with those? And the reality is, it's not. There are places that absolutely ensure that dependencies all are up to date, are all up to date, but the reality is like most of the time that's just noise. People aren't doing much, and often it's not even actionable advice. And yeah, it's like good to keep things up to date, but if you have a lot of priorities and that's not really affecting you, like, do you care? And I know that's from a CVE perspective. I know that there's also like automated solutions that are trying to detect like non-CV stuff, like just bad. And they actually talk about that. There's like malicious patterns you can look for. We all know that in libraries, and now there's like tools coming out for that. But like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's annoying it's annoying. It's very annoying to deal with. It's annoying to get those notifications. It's annoying to not know if it matters. It's a lot of extra stuff, and it's because packages are dangerous, and it's like open source packages created by the world are dangerous. I would say as a security person, as a developer, it sucks. It really is a painful experience for me to deal with, for my engineers to deal with. The risk is there, sure, and of course we need to address that. But from a more practical standpoint, the things that I find that are actually like issues in dependencies are things like people implementing dependencies in their software that I don't want them to. A good example would be at GitHub. We got to a point where it was like, just don't use ImageMagick, right? And if we see you coming across with ImageMagick, which hopefully wouldn't, but if you implement image magic, it needs to be stripped out right away, like right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's libraries are just practically a pain, and then that doesn't. I know that doesn't address though, like all the malicious backdoors and all the things that you could be doing. So I get. I guess what I'm trying to say is like a security person. Of course, I understand why we need to do a better job in the dependency space, but as a developer, it's just another pain in the ass that you have to deal with along the way of trying to get a product shipped. And by the way, the product's not your only concern. Also, as like someone writing stuff, it's there's a multitude of things you have to think about every single day, and it's not just that. So your priorities expand beyond just technical priorities, and it's like, I don't know, it's a very frustrating experience being on the other side of it as a fairly developer focused person some days.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, honestly, that's where the tools should, that's where they should be helping. Um, my issue with CVEs, known things, right, like detection of vulnerable packages, in general, has been. Let's see, how do I say this? Has been that it's on the tail end of the SDLC, right? We always talk about, as what cliche as it is, right? Like pushing left. Package dependency monitoring is more like vulnerability scanning. It is. It's something that happens after the software has been built. And like we have pushed a little bit into the CI CD pipeline, but it's after those decisions have already been made that the developer is going to use a specific package, a specific version, and it's more of like we're trying to catch things in the maintenance phase of an app than earlier on in the life cycle. And I think AI and some of the tools that security is developing, some of those that we see out there, is going to push further left to identifying those things. But again, it's all tied to very specific like CVEs. Hey, we know that this package has a vulnerability in it that's been detected, as opposed to, hey, have we gotten ahead of why developers are using this package? Are they doing it in a secure manner? Are we actually talking about this in the requirements phase, like what you're talking about with GitHub, Ken, right? Like the use of image magic. We know that that's an issue. We're gonna get on that earlier. So if we see you trying to use that dependency as you develop a new feature, we're going to push back on that. That's going to be our requirements. That's going to be in our training. That's going to be in other things. But I don't see a lot of organizations doing that. I see a lot of what we've seen with DAST and SAST over the years of, well, I have Dependabot in place. I have Sneak in place, and it prevents, it notifies me when we have these vulnerabilities or we've seen these issues, which is the same thing we saw with network scanners 15 years ago, right? Like, oh, I scan the network and I see that these CVEs exist, go patch them. Like it doesn't take into account how difficult that can actually be, right? Anyway, so yeah, I don't know if there's a good solve there outside of.
Yeah, I think you're touching accidentally. Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Seth.
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was wrapping.
Well, no, I think you touched upon a point that's outside this article, the scope of this article, but I feel like a lot of people are souring on shift left, but for that reason, which is like the idea being that, you kind of, if you get there early enough, you'll be able to prevent a lot of things. And it's just, if there is no left, there is no right. It's just a continuous circle of constant change and churn. There obviously is a starting point. I mean, that's silly to say there isn't, but that isn't where, like I tell people this all the time when I'm frankly pitching our product. I say, listen, man, or person, sorry, uh, you know, this whole idea that you can do a one-time assessment on something when it's first being developed and then it just goes out the door and then it's going to be mostly fine is we all know it doesn't hold water. It's not real. That doesn't exist. The real issues actually come far further down the road. Sometimes that could be a month later, sometimes that could be 2 years later, but it's usually when things happen later. And I don't know how dependencies necessarily fit into that, but
yeah,
I guess
I mean,
you just touched on the shift
yeah.
left part, and I'm like, really I'm hearing a lot of like, that was a mistake. Like that whole idea is not working right. Like we need to take a more continuous, constant sort of approach.
Constant
But
approach.
again,
Yep.
getting back to it, that's great. But if you don't surface actionable stuff and you just give me a bunch of, well, this could potentially be bad and needs to be updated, it's like, how useful is that? And so again, I know there are companies coming out and have come out and are trying their best to tackle that. Um, and I still question, even still, how you might get a quick alert that like quick after a vulnerability has been introduced into a package and it started being maybe you'll get a quick alert, within a reasonable time after you had pulled that into your app that, hey, this thing's out there. But is that really going to fix it? I mean, the root fix has got to be, an app store style vetting process. If you ask me, I think that's the only way you're going to prevent all this malicious crap from going out the door. Now, how to accomplish that? I mean, I'm sure we all have thoughts, but that's going to be a really, really difficult thing to do. And if you want to be a registry or a package manager, maybe now is the time to start really digging in on how to. And I know they are. I know there is. I know for a fact they are, but
Yeah. I
is it
mean,
working?
again,
Well, it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we've hammered on this a little bit in the past, 3, 6 months, right? Like, because it has been such a big issue. Um, and I always go back to the early days of like NSP with Adam Baldwin, and like before, NPM got taken over and NSP got taken over by GitHub. The fact that it is um, it's not that we can't technically solve that and we can't protect those package repositories. It's just the sheer amount of data that is coming into them, the sheer amount of code that's being produced on a daily basis for most of those package managers, that it becomes a huge problem, right? Like, I, I mean, kind of the ideal standard is what Apple has done with the App Store for iOS and Android, right? Like, they locked it down so completely that it eliminated the ability for malicious actors to push code into those repositories. And it has a chilling effect on um, the ability to innovate when it comes down to it. But from a security perspective, it's a great thing when you have a single source of control that cannot be bypassed. Because I mean, again, you look at let me show module counts really quick, right? Stop screen. Let me present that one. If you go to modulecounts.com, and if you've never looked at this from a package management perspective, you should, right? Just to understand the problem that we're dealing with. And this, I just pulled it up, but the number of packages that are in each of these different package repositories, and then on a daily basis, how much is actually being pushed in, right? You have things like NPM that's getting 750 new packages a day, right? That are just going into the into the package repository that have to be analyzed at some level from a security perspective. And NPM, GitHub, Microsoft actually doing like analysis on those. Like, I know they're getting better, but you saw this huge spike last year, right? Like, and then it dropped back off. Somebody added a whole bunch of packages. It looks like they were trying to do like marketing through the package repository and do search engine optimization based on packages that were pushed into NPM. That's totally what that was. If you look at those packages and that increase from those days, I mean, it just was like going crazy for a while, and it was all random like marketing stuff. It was malicious, but not malicious in like that we're trying to attack people, but we're trying to game the system type attack. And then it drops back off, but you're still seeing 750 new packages a day. The amount of manpower and AI and processing that needs to go into it to make sure that we're not seeing something malicious that we've seen in the past is already a huge problem. Add into that new novel techniques that people are coming up with to attack users and to insert those packages into other places and to add malicious content, you're just, exponentially adding effort to securing these environments because you don't necessarily control everything that's going in there. Right? Like npm, PyPy, Packagist, NuGet. Anyone can go and create a package and push that into it. And how long it lives is probably, dependent on whether or not it's overtly malicious, if it, what it's trying to do, if they're following the rules of the package manager. I just see it as such a huge problem moving forward, right? Like I don't, and to get back to the report itself, I don't see this as an easily solvable issue. It's going to take the package managers, it's going to take the developers, it's going to take pinning. Like we've got to talk about it across the board, how we pick out these packages and actually use them and promote them and certify that they are what we intend them to be. And like, it's just not necessarily a discussion that every organization is having, or even every package manager is having. Anyway, Ken, sorry, I'm getting like on my soapbox.
It's a multi-pronged. No, not at all. I think it's a multi-pronged approach, like anything in security. It's like, package managers do better. Tooling to detect these things do better. And then like, things like, I want to say it was maybe Segment who came on and explained their DNS rebinding prevention, but basically they put their apps into a container that only at a network level could egress into this sort of like reverse proxy. More so like, I don't know. I'm struggling to give you the name of it, but it essentially says, hey, you can only talk to these specific places, to prevent CSRF and whatnot. So you can only, these host names through this app are the only thing you could reach out to, which would help with backdoors. Doesn't solve all the different problems you could have. You could have something that comes in and just blows everything up, right? Deletes everything and just ruins your system just for the heck of it. They talk about all the different types of newer version, because I felt like, it used to be a lot of Bitcoin mining kind of stuff, and then computing resources have kind of, or I'm sure there's a multitude of factors of why that has not been as much of a focus, and it seems to have gone more the way of, like I said, backdoors and things of that nature from the report anyways. And again, so anyways, it's a multi-pronged approach. I think dependency stuff it gets under my skin now because I have to deal with it all the time. And it's like, there's good intentions behind it, but it's so freaking painful. And what's your alternative? I mean, you can't just like develop. I mean, you can, but good luck if you're a startup, getting to your next round if you don't use open source software, right? Like if you just build everything yourself completely, that's unless you're doing something incredibly simple, that's not an option for the majority of us. So we're stuck in this shitty place, to be frank.
Yeah, it is, right? Like, and okay, right. Even if you're dependent, like you decide, okay, we're not going to use dependencies, you're still using some platform. You're still depending on code to, whether that is Nginx, whether that is, Apache, whether that is AWS, right? Like there is code that is providing services to you that you are dependent on, even if it's just not this direct, right? And yeah, it's a hard place to live. It's part of the risk that goes into it. I think at some level you've got to understand what that is from a business perspective. Hey, we are putting our trust in Apple, we're putting our trust in Amazon, and if they get compromised or somebody finds an issue in their supply chain, that's still going to affect us. We've got to be okay with that. But how do we limit the damage when it actually happens? And this gets into like business continuity planning and threat modeling, which I know organizations do it, but I don't see enough of it effectively, like across the board, from a maturity perspective. And maybe I'm just being cynical.
No, you're not. I mean, I feel like I'm being the depressing one, so don't feel bad about being cynical. I did one thing they pointed out in the report that I did think was like, somewhat nice to call out was that, the SEC went after SolarWinds after that attack because they didn't have anything. I mean, like they didn't even have a software security program as far as anybody could tell, right? You and I had discussed this privately. I know somebody who's very close to SolarWinds who I can't talk about, who just the other day was like, yeah, we didn't have anything in place to scan code. There wasn't, this, that, or the other. I'm not going to go into more than that, but suffice it to say, there wasn't a software security program in place there. And it was essentially very egregious. And I really do like the idea of if you don't even try to put into place a security program and you're a vendor and yeah, like good, you should get in trouble. I'm happy with that. Like, fine. I think it should cost you money. I think it should be a real pain. I think it should annoy you. It should hang up all your staff. Not all your staff, but like your legal staff and whatnot. I'm down for that. I'm game for that. I like it. So glad they called that out. And so on the flip side, on the business, you mentioned the business aspect, but from a different angle, made me think of that. From the article.
Yep. And it's super interesting. I'm sure, we'll be discussing this for a while, right? Like PyPy, that, the movement of malware from one package repository to another, probably based on the rules, the new things that NPM is doing is making it harder for them to push it in. So you'll see that, malware developers, are getting more mature as well, right? Like they're getting more sophisticated on where they actually push data, how they're targeting users, and that's to be expected. People mature, right? On both sides of the the attack defense spectrum, and yeah, I mean, you're just going to see more of these malicious packages show up. You've just got to have a plan for it, right? Like you need to have some ability to detect the threats. You've got to have some ability to remediate them, to know what's going on and what's going into your software. So, I mean, this gets into, like your what is it called? Your package, your package list, right? Oh, your SBOM, right? Like, do you know what your bill of materials is? What goes into actually producing your software? And large organizations, this gets difficult because there are so many layers. There's so many different teams that are involved that SBOMs aren't necessarily a thing. Smaller teams like yours, I'm sure you've got a pretty good idea of everything that's going into it. But even then, team of 3 or 4, a developer can start pulling in a package that you didn't expect. And all of a sudden you're dependent on a huge ecosystem that you didn't necessarily intend for functionality, and you may be put in a situation that you got to pull something out like image magic that introduces huge risk, but you've got to have control over that. You've got to have visibility. And I think that's probably where a lot of this feeds is, what is the visibility into your own platform and into the package managers on top of that. Yeah.
I'm just going to say, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, actually, I think you covered it pretty well. I will say everybody should read this article. It is lengthy, but I think it's not just like a statistical breakdown. I mean, they do some pretty fun. They dive into some of the types of dependency chain issues, some of the threat actors, the motivations. Like, it's not just some dry read. So I'd give it a shot for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do like that they're calling out AI here. And I will tell you this, from what I'm seeing in that space, that people are moving so freaking quick. And my prediction on that last note here is that you are going to see, and I don't mean like the LLMs or something like that. I mean the actual like tool chains around interacting with RAG and LLMs and all the various things that you have to do to, chunk and split text and code and all that fun stuff. There's a lot of these convenience libraries out there. I'm seeing them run at a breakneck pace. They're trying to get funded, some of these. So they are allowing pull requests in from, the internet and moving very quickly. And it concerns me a lot. And so that's my prediction, is you may see a pretty nasty influx in that space of these types of And why I say that too is because, to interact with these systems, you do have to download a hefty amount of libraries at times. I mean, a very
Yep.
hefty amount. And there's a lot that are included in those libraries that you have. I mean, when I say a lot, I mean a significantly lengthy list of libraries that these things depend on, to the point where good luck trying to delve down and figure out what all is being introduced into your application. So
Yep.
yeah, I expect 100% to see that area, like I said in the very beginning of this topic, blow up pretty bad.
Yep, it's going to, right? So just be aware, take everything with a grain of salt, and cover your bases, right?
Yeah,
That's
for
that's
sure.
really all you can do as a developer. I mean, we're going to be looking at this. I mean, we're going to be dealing with it for the for the foreseeable future. Right? We're just not going to get around it, but just based on the speed of what's going into it. And then I also start to go to, okay, we're going to have AIs that are going to be creating more and more of this software, like the dependencies that we're using, and what that does to this space as well, will be interesting to watch. We're not quite there yet. Right now, we're still slinging most of this code in an AI assisted fashion for sure. But eventually we're going to become to be more and more dependent on what the AI is actually generating, which introduces a whole other host of problems and things that we're going to need to think about. Anyway, I don't think we need to get into that today.
Hey, you want to hear something funny? By the way, completely off this dependency. It's a totally different topic, and it's more just something I was going to mention because I thought it was funny, and maybe other people can get a good chuckle out of this too, or listening. I had to go and I was like looking for SOC 2 guidelines, right? And for those who aren't familiar with SOC too much, it's just a compliance standard. I'm sure most of our listeners are. But anyways, it was created by CPAs essentially, right? Not essentially, it was created by the accountant like world as a I don't know. If you go back far enough, there's like it was called like, I don't know, like SAS 70 or SC, I don't know, something like that
SAS
originally, and
70.
then they
Yeah.
said something like that, and then it was like SSAE, and then the SSAE thing, I think it was SSAE, and then it became SOC 1 as it evolved for like technology systems, like hey, you're like, because the idea being like, if you're handling financial information, then there needs to be some level of integrity, and that was sort of all derived from, as far as my limited knowledge of all this. Anyways, I'm saying all this because I'm like, you need to go to for the guide, as far as I can tell anyways, at least from the 10 minutes I put into it, or 20 minutes, whatever, you have to go to like this, I don't know, it's AI CPA or something like that website, and to get the resources, which is hilarious because then they're like, well, now you need to sign up if you want these resources. So then you sign up, right? And then you go to the resource that they made you jump through a million hoops to like sign up for. And then once you get there, back to that resource eventually with an authenticated account, it's like, boom, you want this report? We can give that to you, these guidelines. You're gonna love it. $125. Like, what? What the fuck? I just need to know some like small details about some things I have some questions about. And anyways, I don't know, man. I literally LOL'd when they were like $125. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, anyways, I don't know if you've ever
Welcome to the world of auditing, right? Like, you're going to be measured against something that you have to pay for by someone you have to pay who has paid for the knowledge of what you have to be paid. You know what I mean? Like, it's
yeah. Well, who keeps
that
popping up
space
for every resource is the guys we used before, A-Line.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
When you and I were doing auditing stuff or going through an audit together. Yeah. So
yeah, you're usually better off asking, engaging with someone and then asking them to, hey, give me, what is it that I have to do in this situation? Like, because they're the ones that are measuring you anyway. And I mean, from an audit perspective too, right? Like this is why we, I don't know, like PCI, SOC 2, type 2, right? Like a lot of these audit frameworks, and yeah, I mean, now we're off onto another topic, but audit frameworks in general, right? Like from a security perspective, are not the end all be all, right? Like, so that's one of the things that like business people have a hard time, or they struggle with, is like, oh, well, you were PCI compliant, or you have your SOC 2 type 2. And then you're like, but have you ever been through a SOC 2 type 2? Do you realize that you're basically measuring your controls against the controls that you defined, right? So if you decide, hey, I don't really care about dependencies, I'm not going to measure myself against dependencies, right? Like, then you don't have to for your SOC 2 type 2, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then you're paying the
Yeah.
auditor to measure and to give you the certification as well. So there's incentive from the auditor to pass you so that they can make more money and come back and do another audit the next year, right? Like, so there's all of these,
Well,
like,
yeah.
yeah.
No, it's funny you say that, because there's this preconception that you need to have a SAS or a DAS tool to be SOC 2 or SOC compliant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is actually not true. Turns
Mm-hmm.
out that's not true. I mean, it is, but it's not technically true. Nowhere is it written you have to have a SAS, as far as I can tell, a SAS or DAS. Not in there, but it's part of when you do that, it's considered part of keeping things having basically software integrity, but I forget the actual, like, the words, the verbiage they put out. And I mean they by the AI, I think it's AICPA or whatever it's called, whoever makes that guideline. Yeah, it's more of like, well, if you want to satisfy these beautiful terms that we've put out there, well, maybe that's a good idea, but it's not required, which is again a huge misconception with a lot of people, I think. But yeah, so it is basically something you kind of need to do to at least show you're doing the right thing, but it's not listed as a hard requirement by anybody. And then just to your point, it is, you are showing, like, whatever you wrote down, if you have change control, because that's a good thing to have, and it's part of keeping software maintenance and integrity and all that stuff clean, then shit, I lost track. What was I saying?
Change control.
Jesus. Yeah, change
then
control.
You have to show,
and then you have to show that you're actually doing it. My God, I'm having whatever. Anyway, so yeah, you actually have to just prove that if you write it down, essentially, this is what they actually, I loved our team who handled this over at GitHub internally. They were awesome. They are awesome. And but that's what they said. They're like, basically, whatever you write down, you just got to show that you do it.
Yep. Yeah. And that's what that, if you haven't been involved before, that's what the type 2 in that actually means, right? Like, you've got a SOC 2 type 1 audit, which is basically, what are the controls that you have in place? Are they sufficient? And then the type 2 is, okay, prove that you're doing that, right? Like, what is the evidence that you did this over the observation period, as they call it, right? Like, over the course of 3 months, did you follow your change control process? Did you run your static analyzer every month, right? Like, whatever it is that you claim to do, prove that you did it, right? So, I mean, it's interesting, and it does show maturity, right? Like, getting to a SOC 2 type 2, being able to step through that and prove what it is, it proves some maturity. But again, it's not an end all be all in, like, the software is secure, right? Like, that's where we struggle, is that jump that people make. Well, I paid for this audit that said that, I was secure. And you're like, well, really, you just paid for an audit to prove that you were doing the same things that you said you were doing, right? ISO 27001. I mean, there's, we could have someone on to talk about, moving through financial and, like, industrial audits and what that actually does, if it's something people are interested in. Anyway, Ken, we've been going for an hour. Anything else you want to mention today before we call it?
Seth did all the homework for today's episode, so kudos to Seth, because I'm the reason we were late. I did jack shit in terms of research. So Seth is truly amazing, and I want to say a special thank you to Seth for keeping it together today, because if it was on me, it probably wouldn't have happened. So kudos to you, Seth. Thank you for being patient with me, and then putting all this material together.
No worries, man. Anytime. So sweet. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. Jump into Slack. Let us know what your what your position on Kaido or FlowMate or even the supply chain report is. We'd love to continue those conversations. We didn't even get to the list of books that was in chat. I can't remember who it was that actually posted that, but it was a really comprehensive list of interesting things. Oh, it was Cole. Books that he had read that found interesting. I know we could talk for hours probably on that list itself. So maybe we'll bring that up next week.
Yeah.
I want to give that a little bit of thought too, as far as like stuff that I've read in the last year and what I would recommend. So if you have recommendations
over something really interesting for us to review, and if maybe
that's right.
Maybe next time we go on, we can if he's released it publicly, we can talk about it. But anyways, Cole's awesome. Cole's got a lot of what else can you say? So he's got a lot of good thoughts and a lot of good materials. Speaking
of which, we need to get down to Aussie and see Cole and the Australian AppSec contingent at some point. That's on our radar for this year. There was we'll be teaching down in either Melbourne or Sydney at some point this year again, finally reprising that portion of the world. So.
Dude, I love Australians. I mean, the country's great and everything, but the people are, I always have such a good time. I feel like those are people, that culture I just love. I don't know. I just love it when we go down there. Just cool people. So I think it's maybe because they're a little, direct and joke a lot and have great sense of most Australians I've interacted with have a great sense of humor too about stuff. So I know painting with very broad strokes, but anyways, yeah.
All right, good deal. Then we'll see everybody online and we'll catch you all next week. Thanks so much.